Before sunrise, Clara Hale heard the chain inside the depot gate move. It was not the loose rattle of iron in the wind. It was a slow, deliberate scrape from the other side, followed by silence so complete that she could hear her own breath whitening in the cold. She stood alone beneath the faded government sign, one hand gripping the auction key, the other holding a lantern whose flame trembled though the air was still. Nobody in Red Butte County had wanted the old Federal Army depot. Men at the auction had laughed when Clara raised her hand. The property had sold for less than its standing timber, and even the clerk who entered her name in the transfer ledger had warned her that soldiers had vanished there before the War Department closed it. Clara unlocked the gate anyway. Beyond it, the depot waited in rows, 6 warehouses, a command building, empty wagon sheds, and a stone powder house blackened by age. Nothing leaned at random. Doors faced the yard in exact military order. Numbers remained painted above each entrance. The place did not look abandoned in panic. It looked emptied by men who had followed instructions. That disturbed her more than any ghost story. She crossed the yard, noticing deep wagon grooves beneath a collapsed awning. Dust had hardened inside them like plaster. The ruts ran from Warehouse 4 toward the rear road, yet the official notice nailed inside headquarters declared that all freight had been removed before the depot closed in October of 1871. The grooves cut through dust that had settled later. Heavy wagons had left after the government said nothing remained. Clara read the notice twice. Then she compared its date with the War Department ownership papers folded inside her satchel. The dates agreed. The ground did not. She had not bought the depot to investigate the army. After fever took both her parents, creditors seized the boarding house they had built together. Clara purchased the ruins because the warehouses contained beams she could sell, and because sleeping behind a government gate seemed better than sleeping beside the rail line. By noon, salvage no longer occupied her thoughts. Inside the command office, she found a tall records cabinet with its lock smashed inward. Someone had forced it years ago. Every shelf stood bare except the lowest, where a swollen military inventory book lay beneath mouse-chewed cloth. Its entries listed blankets, harness, flour, rifles, lamp oil, and engineering tools. The handwriting remained careful until the final section. There, 6 pages had been cut out close to the binding. Not torn. Removed with a blade. Clara carried the ledger to the window. A narrow column beside the missing pages bore part of a heading, Dispatch Register, transferred. The rest was gone. By late afternoon, clouds covered the hills and the depot darkened early. Clara barred the command office, then followed the wagon ruts toward the rear yard. Near the stone powder house, she found fresh boot prints crossing dust untouched by rain. They led to the iron doors of an underground storage tunnel. The army papers described those tunnels as sealed before the auction. Clara knelt, touched one print, and found its edges sharp. Whoever made it had come after dawn. Its light moved slowly across the buried passage, vanished behind a support wall, then returned brighter than before. Clara did not call out. She lowered her own flame, listening as unseen footsteps approached through a warehouse the government swore was empty. Then a faint metallic click sounded below. Clara lifted her lantern toward the grated opening between the doors. At first she saw only darkness descending beneath the depot. Then, far underground, another lantern suddenly glowed. The light vanished before Clara reached the tunnel doors. She pulled one iron leaf open just wide enough to enter, then paused until her eyes adjusted. Cold air rose from the passage carrying the sharp odor of lamp smoke. Whoever had been below had extinguished the flame only moments earlier. Clara did not follow blindly. She wedged the door with a stone, marked the dust beside it with the heel of her boot, and lowered her lantern toward the steps. Fresh prints descended into darkness, crossed the underground loading chamber, and disappeared near a collapsed partition. No voice answered when she called. Behind the partition, she found only an empty alcove and a thin trail of smoke curling toward a ventilation shaft. The intruder had escaped through another opening. Clara returned at daylight with rope, chalk, and the damaged inventory ledger. The underground rooms had once stored flour, ammunition, harness, and medical crates. Rusted brackets remained fixed to the walls, but nearly every shelf had been stripped clean. Beneath a fallen rack, however, her lantern struck a dull line of metal. It was a document chest. The lock had rusted shut, so Clara worked the hinge pins loose rather than breaking the lid. Inside lay packets of paper fused by damp, several quartermaster receipts, and a sealed envelope protected beneath an oilcloth map. The red wax bore the stamp of the Department of the Platte. She carried the chest upstairs and separated each page near the stove. Most writing had bled into brown clouds. One order remained legible. It was dated February 1872. The auction notice and War Department papers declared the depot abandoned 4 months earlier. The order directed 3 Army wagons to carry engineers, surveying chains, iron markers, and sealed instruments west of the depot. No rifles, provisions, or troop supplies were listed. The crews were instructed to travel at night, avoid county roads, and make no entry in the public dispatch register. Clara read the order again, then unfolded the stained military property map found beneath it. Small penciled numbers appeared along several survey sections west of the depot. She copied them into the blank back pages of the inventory book and locked the original papers inside her trunk. That afternoon, she rode to a rise above the yard and compared the marked sections with distant landmarks. The numbers did not describe scattered military posts. They followed the river from north to south, enclosing one broad, fertile valley. The Seine Valley was divided among the richest ranches in the county. At dusk, Clara noticed a rider standing motionless on the eastern ridge. Sunlight caught the edge of his field glass. When she stepped into the open, he turned his horse and disappeared. She went inside, barred the door, and examined the remaining papers by lamplight. Beneath a water-damaged receipt lay a narrow instruction sheet without a signature. Only one sentence could still be read. The words transformed the hidden journey from an irregular military errand into something darker. Survey lines determined who could claim water, pasture, timber, and homes. Erasing an earlier survey could dispossess families without firing a shot. Clara placed the instruction beside the late order. Both carried the same crease, water stain, and faint smell of oil. They had traveled together, and someone had returned to find them. Destroy all previous boundary surveys immediately. The unsigned instruction remained on Clara's table long after the lamp burned low. She read the single surviving sentence again, searching for some innocent explanation that refused to appear. Government surveys determined where farms began, where roads ended, and who legally possessed the frontier. Destroying every previous boundary survey was not a clerical correction. It was an attempt to replace one history with another. At first light, Clara wrapped the military orders inside oilcloth, locked them beneath the false bottom of her trunk, and rode into Red Butte. She carried only the copied survey numbers in her pocket. If someone had searched the depot once, she would not risk losing the originals. The county survey office occupied 2 rooms beside the courthouse. Shelves overflowed with rolled plats, leather-bound field books, and brass instruments worn smooth by decades of use. Clara requested maps covering the numbered sections listed in the Army orders. The clerk found them quickly because the valley had become some of the county's most valuable grazing land. Nothing looked unusual. Every parcel appeared properly measured, signed, and transferred years earlier. Yet while comparing the maps, Clara noticed faint ridges beneath several boundary lines, as though older markings had been covered with carefully pasted strips of paper. The replacements matched the surrounding ink almost perfectly, but sunlight striking the page exposed their edges. She asked whether earlier editions survived. The clerk hesitated before explaining that obsolete surveys were stored below the courthouse and rarely requested. Regulations allowed access only with approval from Assistant Surveyor Elias Morton, an aging draftsman whose eyesight had faded but whose memory had not. Morton listened quietly while Clara mentioned the altered lines. Instead of dismissing her, he studied her expression. "You noticed them without being told where to look," he said softly. "Most never do." He unlocked a narrow door leading beneath the building. The basement smelled of dust, ink, and drying parchment. Wooden cabinets lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Morton searched until he produced an older survey plat of the same valley. Clara spread both maps across the table. They were unmistakably different. The earlier survey showed hundreds of acres marked as protected Federal Reserve attached to the Army Depot's engineering district. The later version erased those boundaries completely, dividing the same land among private claims approved within a single season. "No explanation?" Clara asked. Morton slowly shook his head. "There should have been amended field notes, revised measurements, or legislative authority. I never found any." Inside another cabinet rested a forgotten survey journal written by one of the original field engineers. Most entries described weather, elevations, and stone markers. Near the final pages, however, the careful handwriting grew uneven. "Army engineers arrived today, ordered to suspend measurements." The boundaries no longer matched the instructions. The final readable sentence stopped Clara cold. The orders came from above. None of us agreed. She carefully copied every page before returning the journal exactly where she had found it. Morton watched without speaking, but before she left, he quietly advised her to trust original field records more than official copies. The ride back to the depot felt longer than the morning journey. As Clara approached the gate, she immediately sensed something had changed. The lock remained untouched. The windows were still barred. Inside the command office, nothing had been stolen. Instead, chairs had shifted several inches. The inventory ledger lay exactly where she had left it, but upside down. A drawer she distinctly remembered closing now stood slightly open. Someone had entered. Someone had searched. And whoever it was wanted to know exactly how much she had already discovered. Outside, in the fading evening light, Clara noticed fresh shovel marks circling the weathered flagpole standing at the center of the depot yard. Clara stood beside the flagpole until the last light slipped behind the western hills. The disturbed earth formed a rough circle no wider than a wagon wheel. Whoever had dug there had worked carefully, removing only enough soil to reach something beneath before filling the hole again. Fresh shovel cuts still showed along the edges, their sharp faces untouched by wind or rain. She knelt and pressed her fingers into the loose dirt. It was still damp below the surface. Someone had been there within the past day. Rather than digging immediately, Clara walked the entire depot yard. Years of hardship had taught her that careful observation often revealed more than hurried action. She counted her own footprints, marked the stranger's tracks with small stones, and noticed they always returned to the flagpole before leading toward the eastern gate. Whoever searched the yard had known exactly where to stop. Only then did she fetch a shovel. The first foot of earth contained nothing but gravel packed hard by decades of wagon traffic. Deeper down, the soil changed to compact clay unlike the surrounding ground, as though the hole had once been deliberately filled. Another careful stroke struck metal with a dull, unmistakable ring. Clara cleared the remaining dirt by hand. A circular brass disc emerged from the earth, its surface coated in green corrosion. She lifted it gently, brushed away the clay, and revealed the faint outline of an American eagle surrounding the words United States Survey Monument. The marker had never belonged beneath the flagpole. Government survey monuments were intended to remain visible because every official boundary in the surrounding country depended upon their recorded position. Burying one was the equivalent of erasing a page from history. She examined its engraved coordinates beneath the fading light. The numbers matched the military survey sections copied from the secret army orders, not the revised county maps she had studied beneath the courthouse. Someone had hidden the original point from which the valley had once been measured. Clara searched the hole again. Several inches below the monument, her fingers touched rusted iron. Together with the shovel, she uncovered a narrow metal cylinder sealed by threaded caps. Time had fused one end shut, forcing her to soak it with lamp oil before carefully twisting it loose. Inside rested a tightly rolled field notebook wrapped in wax cloth. The paper had yellowed but remained dry. Each page contained measurements, compass bearings, elevations, and descriptions of stone markers placed throughout the valley. Every observation matched the earlier courthouse survey rather than the revised government edition. The final entries carried a different tone. Boundary corrected under military instruction. Correction rejected. Ordered to certify false location. Refused. Clara slowly lowered the notebook. The anonymous surveyor had documented every disagreement with remarkable precision. Distances were recalculated, landmarks redrawn, and every rejected measurement carefully preserved. Whoever buried the notebook had intended someone, someday, to discover the truth exactly as it had been measured. Near the final page, another notation caught her attention. Supporting correspondence stored with communications records. She looked toward the black silhouette of the depot's old communications building standing beyond the warehouses. Its roof had collapsed years earlier after a fire, and everyone believed nothing useful had survived inside. If the surveyor had hidden evidence anywhere, it would have been there. Morning found Clara climbing through charred beams and broken rafters. Burned telegraph wire still hung from scorched poles like black vines. Melted glass littered the floor beneath fallen timbers. She searched patiently, clearing debris one section at a time until her shovel struck a warped iron message container trapped beneath collapsed masonry. The lid crumbled apart. Most of the papers inside had burned beyond recognition. Only one coded dispatch remained partly readable. Though smoke had erased entire lines, several shipment numbers survived. Clara compared them with the military order folded safely inside her pocket. They matched perfectly. The same shipment numbers appeared in both documents. The engineering expedition and the hidden survey corrections had been coordinated through the depot's communications office. This was no isolated mistake. It had been an organized operation. Turning the damaged dispatch over, Clara discovered one final surviving notation written across the margin in faded pencil. It referenced a military mail route that no longer appeared on any official government map. The faded notation lingered in Clara's thoughts throughout the night. She spread every document across the command office table: the altered army orders, the buried survey notebook, the coded dispatch, and her copied courthouse maps. One detail connected them all. Each referred, directly or indirectly, to the same forgotten military mail route. Yet none of the official county maps showed such a road. It had disappeared as completely as the original boundary lines. At dawn she returned to the oldest map recovered from the underground document chest. Holding it beside the newer government plat, she noticed a faint dashed line crossing the western hills before fading into the valley. Time had nearly erased it, but the coded dispatch included the same route number beside its shipment entry. Someone had removed the road from history after using it. Clara packed food, a canteen, rope, and the copied documents before setting out on horseback. The trail proved difficult to follow because decades of grass had swallowed most signs of travel. Only scattered stone mile markers, half buried beneath sagebrush, confirmed she remained on the old military route. Their weather numbers matched those listed in the dispatch. By afternoon the abandoned road descended into a narrow canyon where cottonwoods shaded a crumbling stone building. Its roof had collapsed inward, but the remaining walls still displayed rusted iron brackets that once supported telegraph lines. A faded government marker identified the ruins as a military relay station. No one had visited in years. Inside, broken shelves leaned against the walls beside shattered batteries and lengths of telegraph wire. Dust covered everything except a narrow path leading toward the rear office. Clara followed it carefully. Beneath loose floorboards she discovered a hidden compartment containing several leather-bound delivery registers wrapped inside oilcloth. Their pages recorded confidential government mail carried between the Army Depot and engineering survey teams. Dates, riders, destinations, and sealed package numbers filled each line with military precision. Then the records changed. Entire entries had been scratched away with a knife. Only fragments remained. One surviving notation stopped Clara immediately. Package: Original Boundary Authority. Destination: Army Depot. Delivery status: Never completed. She searched the compartment again and found nothing else except a broken brass mail seal bearing the War Department insignia. Outside, hoofbeats echoed across the canyon. An elderly rider approached slowly, leading a tired mule loaded with firewood. He introduced himself as Amos Granger, a retired mail carrier who had ridden portions of the military route as a young man. When Clara mentioned the relay station, his expression grew distant. "I remember government wagons," he said quietly. "They carried document chests instead of supplies. Folks wondered why soldiers guarded papers harder than rifles." He paused before continuing. "There was one surveyor who argued with army officers nearly every visit. Honest fellow. Said the land couldn't belong to the people buying it because the measurements proved otherwise." "What became of him?" Clara asked. Amos looked toward the silent hills. "He disappeared." The answer came without hesitation. "No funeral. No trial. Just gone. His family packed what little they had and vanished before winter." Clara thanked him and watched him ride away until the canyon fell silent again. Before leaving the relay station, she searched the office walls one final time. A hollow sound answered when she knocked against a warped section of timber beside the old telegraph desk. Removing two loose boards revealed a narrow cavity hidden inside the wall. Within it rested a government envelope, perfectly dry despite the passing years. Its faded wax seal had never been broken. Clara carried the unopened envelope back to the depot before allowing herself to break the seal. She wanted no interruption, no wandering rider, and no curious stranger looking over her shoulder when decades of silence finally gave way to written truth. Inside the command office, she closed the shutters, lit a single oil lamp, and carefully unfolded the brittle pages. The letter began without ceremony. "To whoever still believes measurements matter more than orders." It was signed by Thomas Ellery, the surveyor Amos Granger had remembered. Clara read slowly. Ellery explained that he had been assigned to verify military boundary surveys west of the depot after the Civil War. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Every stone marker, river crossing, and compass bearing agreed with the original federal plats. Then Army engineers arrived carrying revised instructions that no longer matched the land itself. They were ordered to move boundaries on paper instead of in the field. Ellery refused. He wrote that several fellow surveyors protested, insisting official measurements could not be altered without new observations. Their objections were ignored. Military officers claimed emergency authority required immediate revisions and warned that anyone delaying the work would be dismissed. The new maps transferred thousands of acres from protected Federal Reserve into private ownership. Ellery believed the changes were illegal. Knowing the original surveys would eventually disappear, he secretly copied every notebook, sketch, and calculation before surrendering the official records. He dared not keep everything together. If one hiding place were discovered, the entire truth would vanish. Instead, he divided the evidence. The letter listed 3 separate caches concealed using Army depot supply numbers rather than ordinary landmarks. Anyone unfamiliar with the depot's inventory system would never recognize the locations. Clara spread the inventory ledger across the table beside the letter. For the first time, the missing pages made terrible sense. Without the complete supply index, the hidden locations became meaningless numbers. Ellery had anticipated exactly that possibility. His final paragraphs grew hurried, the handwriting less steady. He warned that certain Army officers had ordered replacement surveys filed inside government archives while authentic field records were quietly removed. Public copies could no longer be trusted because they reflected political instructions rather than measured reality. One sentence lingered with Clara more than any other. The depot was never protecting supplies. It was protecting memory. She lowered the paper and looked around the silent command office. The numbered warehouses, the altered inventory, the buried survey monument, the erased dispatch register. Everything pointed toward a single purpose. Someone had transformed an ordinary military depot into a hidden archive preserving the frontier's original history. At the bottom of the final page, Ellery included one last clue. He instructed the reader to begin with Warehouse 7. Clara immediately frowned. She knew the depot better now than the day she bought it. There were only 6 warehouses. She fetched her lantern and walked into the moonlit yard anyway, counting each building from the eastern gate exactly as the Army had numbered them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nothing more. No collapsed foundation. No missing structure. No ruined walls hidden by brush. The numbering ended exactly where it always had. Clara unfolded Ellery's letter once again to make certain she had not misread the faded ink. The words remained unmistakable. The first collection rests beneath Warehouse 7. She slowly lifted her lantern across the quiet depot. If Warehouse 7 had never existed above ground, then it had been built somewhere no official visitor was ever meant to see. Clara barely slept. Before dawn she spread every recovered record across the command office floor. The Army orders, the altered survey maps, Thomas Ellery's letter, the inventory ledger with its missing pages, and the field notebook rescued from beneath the flagpole. She searched for anything that might explain how a depot with only 6 warehouses could conceal a 7th. The answer did not come from the letter. It came from the buildings themselves. Standing outside with a measuring rope, Clara paced the distance between each warehouse exactly as Army engineers would have done. Warehouses 1 through 6 followed identical spacing. Yet beyond Warehouse 6, the loading yard extended much farther than necessary before reaching the perimeter wall. Enough room remained for another structure. She measured again. The empty yard matched the footprint of every other warehouse. Only there was no building. Instead, the ground formed a broad rectangle covered with packed gravel that looked no different from the surrounding yard unless someone measured it carefully. Clara walked its perimeter, tapping the earth with the wooden handle of her shovel. Most of the yard answered with the dull sound of compacted soil. Near the center, however, the echo changed. Hollow. She knelt and brushed away decades of dust. Beneath the gravel appeared the straight edge of fitted stone, unlike the natural ground nearby. Patiently removing more earth revealed the outline of a massive iron ring set flush into a concealed trapdoor. Her pulse quickened. The entrance had been disguised so perfectly that wagon traffic alone would never have exposed it. Only someone comparing measurements instead of appearances would have noticed. Using a length of chain for leverage, Clara pulled. Nothing moved. The trapdoor had not been opened in decades. She clean-packed dirt from its edges and tried again. This time rust groaned beneath the strain. Slowly, inch by inch, the heavy door lifted, releasing a breath of cold air that smelled of dry timber and old paper rather than damp earth. A stone staircase descended into darkness. Clara lowered her lantern. The flame illuminated carefully laid brick walls untouched by cave-ins or flooding. Whoever constructed the chamber had intended it to survive for generations. She descended cautiously. At the bottom stood a wide underground room supported by thick timber beams. Dust covered every surface, but nothing appeared disturbed. Along both walls stretched rows of iron document cabinets, each still bearing brass identification plates stamped with military inventory numbers. There were no rifles, no ammunition, no food stores, only records. She opened the nearest cabinet. Inside rested rolled survey maps tied with faded government ribbons. The next contained engineering reports, boundary calculations, and correspondence between Army survey teams. Another held payment ledgers recording land purchases completed only weeks after the official boundaries had been altered. The dates aligned perfectly. Original surveys disappeared. Revised maps appeared. Private buyers acquired enormous tracts almost immediately afterward. It had never been coincidence. It had been a carefully organized transfer. As Clara continued examining the cabinets, she realized someone had preserved every piece of evidence the conspirators intended to erase. Ellery had been telling the truth. The depot had hidden history beneath everyone's feet. Then, inside the final cabinet, she uncovered a leather portfolio sealed with red wax. Across its cover appeared a single handwritten notation. Authorization approved. Territorial Judge Samuel Whitcomb. Clara stared at the signature in stunned silence. Judge Whitcomb's name was honored throughout the territory as a symbol of fairness. If his signature was genuine, the conspiracy reached far beyond the Army depot. It reached into the highest court that had ever declared the stolen land legal. Clara carried the sealed portfolio into the command office before opening it. The rising sun had barely reached the depot yard, yet she barred the door and closed every shutter. If someone had hidden an underground archive for decades, she would not risk exposing its contents to curious eyes now. The red wax broke with a crisp snap. Inside lay court correspondence, certified land patents, military certifications, and several letters exchanged between Territorial Judge Samuel Whitcomb and senior government officials. Clara expected to find proof that the judge had uncovered the fraud. Instead, she found his signature approving it. Each approval authorized private ownership of land that earlier military surveys had classified as protected Federal Reserve. Attached to the petitions were certifications claiming Army engineers had completed lawful boundary revisions. Clara knew those certifications rested upon measurements Thomas Ellery had refused to endorse. They had been built upon false surveys. She compared the signatures with copies preserved in county court records. Every stroke of Whitcomb's pen matched perfectly. If the documents were genuine, the conspiracy had not ended inside the depot. It had continued through the courthouse. The discovery demanded more than suspicion. It demanded verification. Leaving the underground archive carefully concealed, Clara rode once again to Red Butte. Rather than asking directly about Judge Whitcomb, she requested access to historic land patents issued during the same years as the altered surveys. The courthouse clerk produced volume after volume without hesitation. Few people ever studied records so old. Clara examined each patent patiently. The names changed. The acreages differed. One pattern never did. Every questionable transfer carried Whitcomb's authorization beside a military certification issued from the depot. One document led naturally to the next. Army survey. Judicial approval. Private ownership. The sequence repeated again and again. Late that afternoon she discovered something even more troubling. Dozens of homestead applications submitted by ordinary frontier families had been denied because the land supposedly lay within protected government boundaries. Months later, after those same boundaries quietly shifted on revised maps, enormous ranches acquired the identical property through private purchase. The families disappeared from the records. The wealthy remained. Clara copied every file number into her notebook. History was beginning to reveal not only who had profited, but who had suffered. An elderly archivist noticed her growing stack of notes. "You've been studying those transfers for hours," he remarked gently. "Most people only ask about famous judges. I'm trying to understand the boundaries," Clara answered carefully. The old man sighed. "My father always believed something changed after the army surveyors came through. Folks lost claims they'd measured themselves. Nobody could explain why. His quiet words confirmed what the records already suggested. The altered maps had reshaped lives, not merely property lines. As evening settled over Red Butte, Clara returned to the courthouse vault one final time. She requested the original land patent index for Whitcomb's judicial district. The clerk frowned. It was here yesterday. Together they searched every shelf. The volume had vanished. So had several original patents Clara intended to compare with the underground archive. Someone had removed them before she could. Standing inside the silent records room, Clara slowly closed her notebook. The evidence hidden beneath the depot remained safe. But whoever had begun erasing history generations earlier had not stopped trying. Clara left the courthouse carrying nothing that revealed her alarm. If someone had stolen the original land patents, appearing frightened would only confirm their timing had succeeded. She thanked the clerk, mounted her horse, and rode calmly through Red Butte until the town disappeared behind the hills. Only then did she urge the mare into a faster pace toward the abandoned depot. By the time she reached the gate, dusk had settled across the yard. She locked the entrance behind her and descended into the hidden archive beneath the false Warehouse 7. The missing courthouse records no longer troubled her as deeply. Every crucial survey, engineering report, and judicial authorization still rested inside the concealed cabinets. Whoever removed the courthouse files had acted too late. Clara understood something the conspirators never expected. Paper could disappear from one office. It could not vanish from every place at once. She spent the evening sorting the underground collection into careful groups. Original field surveys occupied one stack. Military engineering reports formed another. Land patents, payment ledgers, and judicial correspondence each received separate bundles. As she compared dates and signatures, the conspiracy unfolded with startling precision. Nothing had happened by accident. Survey boundaries shifted. Military certifications followed. Judicial approvals appeared days later. Private investors purchased enormous tracts within weeks. The same sequence repeated across valley after valley. Near midnight, Clara uncovered a ledger listing document shipments sent from the depot before its closure. Most entries described ordinary government correspondence. Several, however, carried unusual routing instructions. Instead of traveling directly to territorial offices, certified copies had been dispatched through different military mail stations across the frontier. Thomas Ellery had anticipated destruction. He had ensured duplicates survived. The realization inspired a new plan. If the originals beneath Warehouse 7 remained hidden while certified copies reached government investigators through separate routes, no single theft could erase the evidence again. At sunrise, Clara rode into town without entering the courthouse. She visited the telegraph office first. The operator recognized her from the property auction and agreed to send brief coded messages requesting contact with the federal archive responsible for retired military engineering records. Clara avoided mentioning land theft or Judge Whitcomb. She asked only where authenticated historical evidence should be delivered for official review. Next, she purchased sturdy envelopes, sealing wax, and certified postal forms from the adjoining mail office. Returning to the depot, she spent hours copying maps, letters, and survey pages by hand. Every copied document received careful notes identifying its cabinet, bundle, and original filing order. Accuracy mattered as much as preservation. Before sunset, she prepared 3 identical evidence packets. Each contained copies of the Army orders, Thomas Ellery's letter, selected survey pages, and the chain connecting military revisions to judicial approvals. She addressed the packets to separate federal offices using different postal routes listed in the old military dispatch ledger. No single lost shipment could destroy the case. As darkness settled, Clara sealed the final envelope with red wax. Outside, distant hoofbeats echoed beyond the depot fence. She quietly extinguished the lamp and stepped to the window. A lone rider circled the property once without approaching the gate. After several long moments, the stranger disappeared into the night. Clara waited until silence returned before hiding the prepared evidence packets beneath loose floorboards. Tomorrow they would begin traveling in different directions. For the first time since unlocking the abandoned depot, Clara felt the truth had gained a chance to outrun those determined to bury it forever. Federal investigators arrived at the depot 3 weeks after Clara mailed the last evidence packet. They did not come with fanfare or newspaper reporters. 2 Army officers, a survey commissioner, and a government archivist rode through the gate carrying sealed credentials bearing the same War Department seal Clara had seen upon the hidden orders. None had heard of Warehouse 7 before receiving identical evidence from separate postal routes. That was precisely why Clara had copied everything. She led them beneath the concealed trapdoor without speaking. When the archivist opened the first cabinet, he removed his hat in silence. Shelf after shelf contained original surveys, engineering journals, payment ledgers, judicial correspondence, and military orders preserved exactly as Thomas Ellery had hidden them. Nothing had been altered. Nothing had been destroyed. The investigators spent days cataloging every document before removing a single page. Each bundle received a numbered inventory matching the original military filing system. Survey monuments listed in Ellery's notebook corresponded perfectly with the recovered maps. Payment ledgers matched land patents. Engineering reports confirmed that official boundaries had been deliberately changed after lawful measurements were completed. The evidence supported every suspicion Clara had uncovered. Soon additional officials arrived from territorial headquarters. They reopened land records thought settled for decades and compared them with the archive beneath the depot. Every new examination strengthened the same conclusion. The valley had been stolen through paper rather than violence. News spread quickly across neighboring settlements. Families whose grandparents had lost homesteads came forward carrying faded deeds, tax receipts, and forgotten letters. Many had believed their ancestors simply failed to prove ownership. Now they learned the records themselves had betrayed them. Formal hearings followed. Military officers testified about the recovered engineering orders. Government surveyors verified the original boundary calculations. Archivists authenticated Thomas Ellery's handwriting. One fraudulent transfer after another collapsed beneath documentary proof that had survived only because honest people refused to destroy it. The territorial court ordered dozens of disputed claims reviewed under the restored surveys. Several wealthy ranch owners surrendered land acquired through the altered patents. Others challenged the rulings but found little defense against original government records preserved inside Warehouse 7. Clara never sought recognition. She attended each hearing quietly, answering questions only when investigators requested clarification about where individual documents had been discovered. The evidence spoke far more convincingly than she ever could. Months later, the depot no longer stood abandoned. Survey teams returned to replace buried monuments according to Ellery's original measurements. Government clerks corrected official plats. Families visited the valley carrying copies of judgments restoring property their grandparents had lost without understanding why. The place once feared as cursed had become the source of long-delayed justice. On the final afternoon before the investigators sealed the archive for transfer to the National Records Office, the chief archivist handed Clara one remaining wooden crate discovered beneath the command office floor. Unlike every cabinet below Warehouse 7, this crate bore no inventory number. Only a faded military seal stretched across its lid. "It wasn't listed anywhere," the archivist said quietly. "We thought you should see it before it's opened." Clara rested her hand upon the weathered wood. If the depot had guarded every other secret for half a century, perhaps its greatest one had been waiting beneath the floor all along. The wooden crate resisted every attempt to open it. Its iron bands had fused with age, and the military seal across the lid remained remarkably intact. The chief archivist carefully cut the brittle wax while two investigators recorded every detail in their notebooks. Clara stood quietly beside them, remembering the morning she had first unlocked the deserted depot. She had come searching for scrap timber. Instead, she had uncovered an entire history someone had tried to erase. The lid finally lifted. Inside rested neatly bundled packets wrapped in oilcloth, each protected from moisture with extraordinary care. The first bundle contained the complete chain of original military orders directing engineers to preserve authentic surveys rather than destroy them. Attached were signed statements from several Army officers explaining that they feared corrupt officials would eventually replace the genuine records with fraudulent copies. Another packet held personal letters exchanged between Thomas Ellery and Captain Nathan Briggs, the depot commander during its final years. Their correspondence revealed the difficult choice they faced. They lacked the authority to stop the conspiracy openly, yet they refused to become part of it. Together they designed the hidden archive beneath the false Warehouse 7, knowing that one honest discovery in the future might accomplish what they could not. The final document was addressed simply, "To the first lawful keeper of this depot." Clara unfolded the letter with steady hands. Captain Briggs wrote that the depot would almost certainly be abandoned and forgotten. Rumors, fear, and silence would protect it better than soldiers ever could. If an honest person eventually purchased the property, That individual would possess legal authority to uncover what the government itself had failed to defend. History, he wrote, cannot speak for itself. It must wait for someone willing to listen. Clara slowly lowered the page. For years she had believed she was rescuing forgotten records. Now she understood that generations earlier, honorable men had entrusted those records to someone they would never meet. The Federal Archive accepted every original document, while certified copies remained in Red Butte. The corrected surveys restored additional homesteads to descendants of displaced families, and official maps were rewritten to match the authentic field measurements preserved beneath the depot. Memorial plaques honored Thomas Ellery, Captain Briggs, and the surveyors who had risked their careers to protect the truth rather than surrender it. The abandoned Army depot itself received a new purpose. Instead of being demolished for lumber, it became a protected historical site where visitors could study the restored records, the original survey monument, and the hidden entrance to Warehouse 7. Schoolchildren walked the same yard once feared by their grandparents, learning how quietly injustice could hide behind official papers, and how patiently truth could survive. On the anniversary of the depot's reopening, Clara stood beneath the restored flagpole where the buried survey monument had first been found. The valley stretched before her exactly as the original surveyors had measured it decades earlier. Farms flourished where uncertainty had once divided neighbors. Families who had lost everything finally possessed deeds reflecting the land that had always been theirs. She arrived with nothing but hope and a rusted key. She left knowing the greatest treasure inside the deserted Army depot had never been gold, weapons, or forgotten supplies. It was the truth, and because that truth had finally become part of the official record, neither time nor power could bury it again.